the house at the end of Sector 9. So this story was sent to me by a guy I'll call Ryan. He lives in a mid-sized city in the Middle East, one of those places where old neighborhoods sit right next to new construction. He says what happened to him still affects him to this day, and after reading through everything he sent me, I have to say I believe him. Ryan was 24 when he got his first job as a night security guard. The pay wasn't great, but it covered rent, and honestly he was just happy to have something steady. The site he was assigned to was a partially constructed residential complex on the edge of the city, a place the locals called Sector 9. Most of the buildings were finished. People had already moved into about 2/3 of them. But the last row, the houses at the very end of the development, those were still empty. Construction had stopped on them about a year earlier. Nobody told Ryan why. His job was simple: walk the perimeter every 2 hours, check the gates, make sure no one broke in to steal copper wire or equipment, log everything, go home in the morning. Simple. The first week was completely uneventful. He'd do his rounds, sit in the small guard booth, drink tea, watch something on his phone. The place was quiet. Almost too quiet, he said, but he figured that was just the nature of the job. It was on his 9th night that things started to feel off. He was doing his 2 a.m. round, walking the path between the occupied buildings and the empty ones at the end of Sector 9. He had a flashlight, but the streetlights in that area were already installed and working, so he didn't really need it. As he passed the 4th empty house on the row, he noticed something. The front door was open. Not wide open, just slightly, maybe a few inches. He stopped and looked at it for a moment. He was pretty sure it had been closed during his 12 a.m. round. He shone his flashlight at it anyway, nothing unusual. Probably the wind, he told himself. He pushed it shut, made a note in his log, and continued walking. But when he came back 2 hours later, at 4 a.m., the door was open again. Same door, same few inches. He stood there longer this time. He swept the flashlight across the front of the house. Empty windows stared back at him. He called out, "Hello, anyone in there?" The way you do when you don't really expect an answer. He got none. He pushed the door shut again, and this time he wedged a small rock against it. He noted it in his log and went back to the booth. When morning came and his shift ended, he mentioned the door to the day guard, a much older man named Abu Faris who had worked the site since the beginning. Abu Faris looked at him for a moment without saying anything. Then he said, "Which house?" Ryan described the location. 4th one from the end, left side. Abu Faris nodded slowly and said, "Don't go inside that one." Ryan asked why. Abu Faris just shook his head and said the construction workers had stopped going near it. That was all he would say. Now at this point, Ryan said he wasn't particularly scared. He was more curious than anything. He figured Abu Faris was just being superstitious, the way older people sometimes are about places where something bad happened, a death, an accident, whatever. He thought maybe a worker had gotten hurt there, or someone had died during construction. He decided he'd look into it and not think too much about it. But then the 10th night happened. He was in the booth at around 1 a.m. when he heard something. Not a crash, not a scream, just a sound. A soft, rhythmic sound, like something being dragged slowly across a hard floor. It was coming from the direction of the empty houses. He picked up his flashlight and radio and walked toward the sound. As he got closer, he realized it was definitely coming from that 4th house. He stood outside it. The door was shut, his rock was still wedged against it, but the sound was coming from inside. Slow, steady, like furniture being moved across concrete, but too slow, too deliberate. He radioed the site supervisor, no answer. It was 1 a.m. on a Wednesday, so that wasn't a surprise. He stood outside the house for almost 10 minutes just listening. The sound continued without stopping. Same rhythm, same pace. He tried to convince himself it was a pipe, water pressure, an animal, a bird maybe. Then the sound stopped. And right after it stopped, he heard something else. Breathing. Not from inside the house. from directly behind him. Rayan spun around. There was no one there, just the empty street and the dark windows of the other houses. He stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding. He swept the flashlight in every direction. Nothing. He told himself he had imagined it. He went back to the booth and did not do his 2 a.m. round. He sat in the booth with the door closed until sunrise. He debated quitting after that. He said he spent the entire day trying to logic his way out of being scared. By the time his shift started that night, he had mostly convinced himself that he had just spooked himself. The sound was probably pipes. The breathing was probably his own, amplified by adrenaline. He was alone in a quiet place in the middle of the night. Of course, his brain was going to play tricks on him. So he went back. Everything was fine for the first few hours. 10 p.m. round, nothing unusual. Midnight round, same. He was starting to relax again. Then at 1:30 a.m., he saw a light. It was coming from the window of the fourth house. Not a strong light, dim, flickering slightly, like a candle or a phone screen. But it was definitely a light. He hadn't seen it from the booth. He only noticed it during his round when he was walking close to the building. His first thought was, someone broke in. Squatters, maybe. It happened at construction sites. He radioed the supervisor again. This time he got through. The supervisor told him not to confront anyone alone and said he'd call the police and come to the site himself. He told Rayan to just watch the building and make sure nobody left. So Rayan stood about 20 meters from the house, watching. The light moved. It went from the lower floor window to what he assumed was an upper window. The building was 2 stories, and he could now see a faint glow on the second floor. Then it went back down, then back up, like someone walking through the house with a light source. He waited for the supervisor. He waited for the police. They arrived about 25 minutes later. Rayan led them to the house. The door was shut. The rock was still wedged against it. The supervisor shone his own torch at the window, no light. They all stood there for a moment. The police officer tried the door. The rock held. He knocked the rock away and pushed the door open. They went inside. Rayan stayed close behind the officer as they moved through the house. Construction materials everywhere. Dust on the floor that had not been disturbed. Plastic sheeting over the walls. They checked every room on the ground floor, bathroom, what would have been a kitchen, the main living area. Nothing. No one. Not a single footprint in the dust except their own. They went upstairs. Same thing. Empty rooms, undisturbed dust. No sign that anyone had been inside at any point. The police officer made a remark about wasting his time. The supervisor seemed embarrassed. They all left. But as Rayan was the last one to walk out of the front door, he looked back over his shoulder for one final check. And in the far corner of the room they had just searched, he saw something that nobody else saw because they were already outside. There were 2 small handprints on the dusty floor. They weren't there when they had walked through the room. He was certain of it. The officer had swept his light across every surface. The prints were fresh, small, like those of a young child. And they were facing the wall. Rayan quit the next morning. He said that image, those 2 small handprints facing the corner of an empty room, was the thing that finally broke whatever composure he had been holding on to. He did some asking around before he left. He talked to one of the construction workers who was on site doing repairs in the occupied buildings. When he brought up the house, the worker immediately looked uncomfortable. He didn't want to talk at first, but eventually he told Rayan that about 2 years ago, during construction, one of the workers had found something buried beneath the foundation of that specific house when they were laying the groundwork. He didn't say what it was. He just said that after they found it, the project manager ordered them to pour the concrete over it and never speak about it again. And that within a month of doing that, 3 workers had quit. One of them, a young man who had been on the crew since the beginning, had walked off the site one night and never came home. They never found him. Rayan now lives in a different part of the city. He says he still occasionally dreams about that house. In the dream, he is always standing outside it at night, looking at the second-floor window. And in the window, looking back at him, is a small figure. He can never make out the face, but he can always see the hands. They're pressed flat against the glass, facing inward. That's Rayan's story. If you've worked a night security job or been alone in an empty building at night, you know that particular kind of fear, the one that doesn't come all at once, but builds so slowly you almost don't notice it until you're completely surrounded by it. Whatever was in that house in Sector 9, it never needed to show itself fully. It just needed him to know it was there. And it made sure that he did.